It was still night when the first silhouettes emerged from the shadows of Paris. Armed men, bearing the colors of the king, moved like phantoms through the narrow, mud-soaked streets of the sleeping city. The sound of their boots echoed against wet stones, shattering the sepulchral silence of that dawn which would forever change the course of history. Friday, October 13th, 1307. In Templar commanderies scattered across all of France, the monk warriors slept in peace, confident in divine protection and the loyalty of the king they had sworn to serve. They did not know that, on that very night, hundreds of royal soldiers marched toward them, carrying sealed orders that would transform heroes into heretics, protectors into prisoners. The first blow came without warning. Doors were shattered, swords drawn, screams echoed through corridors of stone. The Knights Templar, the most powerful military order in Christendom, were captured like common criminals, their white beards trembling with fear and disbelief. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the order, was dragged from his chambers wearing only a linen tunic, his eyes reflecting the confusion of a man who could not comprehend how God had permitted such betrayal.
Philip IV of France was known as the Fair, but behind his noble appearance lurked a man consumed by ambition and tormented by fear. Since ascending the throne in 1285, his wars against England and Flanders had drained the royal coffers to the last coin. France was bankrupt, but a king could not admit such weakness without losing his throne. It was then that Philip did what many monarchs did in times of desperation. He sought out the Templars. The order had lent money to his grandfather, St. Louis, to finance the Seventh Crusade. They had financed wars, built cathedrals, sustained the French crown itself in moments of crisis. Why would they not do the same again? The meeting took place in the king's private chambers, far from the eyes of the court. Jacques de Molay, already aged but still imposing in his white tunic with the red cross, sat before the golden throne. Between them, only silent scribes and the shadow of a negotiation that would seal both their fates. Philip needed an astronomical sum, enough to finance not only his current wars, but also to expand his kingdom, build a new capital, and ensure that France became the dominant power of Europe. The amount was so absurd that even the Templars, with all their wealth, felt the weight of the proposal. But Jacques de Molay was a man of faith, and faith blinded him to the dangers of politics. He believed that serving the Christian king was serving God. He agreed to the loan, establishing terms and interest rates that at the time seemed reasonable. What neither foresaw was the true nature of Philip's ambition. The king did not merely want borrowed money, he wanted money he would never need to return. And slowly, in his tortuous mind, a sinister plan began to take root. The months passed, and debts accumulated. Philip borrowed more and more, always promising future payments, always inventing new wars that justified fresh loans. The Templar treasurers began to worry, but Jacques de Molay maintained his trust in the Christian king. Until came the day of the first overdue payment. Philip summoned a private meeting with the Grand Master. This time, however, he was no longer smiling. His eyes were cold as the Parisian winter when he spoke the words that sealed the Templars' fate. Master Jacques, you must understand that a king cannot be debtor to his own subjects. This would create a dangerous precedent for the crown." De Molay did not immediately comprehend the implicit threat. He responded with the honesty of a holy man. "Your Majesty, the order has always served Christian kings with loyalty. We are prepared to renegotiate the terms if necessary." But Philip had already made his decision. The debt was too large to be paid, and the creditors were too powerful to be ignored. Only one solution remained: destroy the creditors, and with them the debt itself. And thus, in the shadows of royal power, began to weave the conspiracy that would destroy the most powerful military order in Christendom. The original sin was complete. The debt born of necessity had transformed into greed, and greed would blossom into betrayal. Philip IV had discovered it was easier to destroy his creditors than to pay them, and thus, in the shadows of royal power, began to weave the conspiracy that would destroy the most powerful military order in Christendom.
The months following the secret meeting transformed Philip IV into a shadow of himself. The king who once walked the palace corridors with the confidence of God's anointed now started at every noise, saw conspiracies in every whisper, felt the weight of invisible eyes that judged him. The debt had grown like a malignant tumor. Each morning the royal treasurers brought increasingly somber reports. The wars continued draining the coffers. The Templars began pressing for payments, and other creditors followed suit. France walked toward bankruptcy, and with it, Philip's throne swayed dangerously. But there was something even more disturbing. The Templars seemed to know too much. Jacques de Molay no longer showed the same deference as before. His visits to the palace became more formal, his smiles rarer. Worse still, rumors whispered that the Grand Master had been consulting other European kings about the French financial situation. If the truth about Philip's insolvency spread, his kingdom would crumble like a castle of sand. Guillaume de Nogaret constantly fed these fears. The Chancellor was a man of humble origin who had risen to power through cruelty and intelligence. He knew his position depended entirely on his king's paranoia, and so he cultivated it like a gardener tends poisonous flowers. "Majesty," he would whisper during private dinners, "the Templars are not merely creditors, they are an army within your kingdom. Their fortresses are more powerful than your own. Their soldiers are more loyal to Jacques de Molay than to you. I ask you, what prevents them from deciding to collect their debts by force?" Each night, Philip lay tormented by visions of Templar knights marching on Paris, of Jacques de Molay seated on his throne, of his own head rolling down cathedral steps. Fear consumed him from within like acid, corroding his reason, his morality, his very humanity. It was then that the informants arrived. Esquif de Floran was a former Templar expelled from the order for unworthy conduct. He brought sordid stories about secret rituals, heretical practices, blasphemies committed in initiation ceremonies. His accusations were vague, contradictory, but they were exactly what Philip wanted to hear. "They spit on the cross during initiations," Floran murmured, his eyes gleaming with the malice of a man thirsting for revenge. "They worshipped a demonic idol called Baphomet. They practice sodomy among themselves and force new members to kiss the private parts of their superiors. Other witnesses appeared like crows drawn to carrion. Each brought stories more absurd than the last, but Nogaret connected them like precious pearls. He knew it did not matter if the accusations were true. What mattered was that they were repeated enough to become facts in the popular mind. For months, the royal propaganda machine worked tirelessly. Rumors were planted in taverns, sermons commissioned from corrupt priests, anonymous pamphlets circulated through the streets. The Templars, who for 200 years had been seen as heroes of Christendom, began to be whispered about as demons in disguise. Philip convinced himself completely of his own lie. In his mind distorted by paranoia and guilt, the Templars truly became a mortal threat to the Christian kingdom. Destroying them would no longer be a crime motivated by greed, but a sacred act of purification. The transformation was complete. The king who had asked for help from the Templars had become the inquisitor who would condemn them. And in the shadows of the palace, preparations for the greatest betrayal of the Middle Ages began to take shape.
The dawn of October 13th brought with it the echo of lamentations that spread across all France. In less than 24 hours, practically every Templar in the kingdom had been imprisoned. The operation was executed with military precision, as if the king himself had learned tactics from the men he now betrayed. Jacques de Molay was taken to the fortress of the Temple in Paris, ironically the same building that had served as the headquarters of the Order's power in France. Its thick walls, built to protect Templar treasures, now became the walls of his prison. The interrogation began 3 days after the arrest. Guillaume de Nogaret personally supervised the process, his sinister figure looming over the instruments of torture like a vulture over carrion. Beside him, Dominican inquisitors murmured Latin prayers, blessing the instruments they would use to save the souls of heretics. "Master Jacques," said Nogaret with false courtesy, "you are here as a suspect of the gravest heresies against our Holy Mother Church. If you confess your guilt, divine mercy may yet save your soul." Jacques de Molay, despite being nearly 70 years old, maintained the erect and dignified posture of a man who had dedicated his life to God's service. His eyes, though tired from age and imprisonment, still gleamed with the flame of conviction. "Lord Nogaret," he replied with a firm voice, "I have served God and Christendom for more than 40 years. I shed my blood in the Holy Land, protected pilgrims, defended the faith against infidels. If this is heresy, then I am guilty." The response sealed his fate. The instruments were brought one by one. The wheel, the rack, the red-hot pincers. But the inquisitors were experienced. They knew that physical torture was less effective than psychological torture. They brought other Templars, younger men, less prepared for suffering, and tortured them before Jacques de Molay's eyes.
The screams echoed through the stone dungeons, mixing with the desperate prayers of prisoners. Geoffrey de Charnay, preceptor of Normandy, had his fingers broken one by one. Hughes de Perrot, visitor of France, was subjected to water torture until he nearly drowned. Each cry of agony was a dagger in the Grand Master's heart, knowing these men suffered because of him. "Confess," whispered Nogaret at each new torture session, "and the suffering will cease, not just yours, but that of all your men." For weeks, Jacques de Molay resisted, even when they applied red-hot iron to his feet, even when they broke his fingers with hammers, even when they deprived him of sleep and food until he hallucinated demons dancing on his cell walls. But there was a limit to human resistance, especially when forced to witness the suffering of those one loves. It was on the night of October 24th that Jacques de Molay's will finally broke, not from physical pain, but from the sight of a young Templar, barely out of adolescence, being branded with hot iron while screaming for his mother. "Stop," murmured the Grand Master, his voice hoarse from praying and screaming. "Stop, I will confess." The confession was drafted by royal scribes, each word carefully chosen to maximize dishonor. Jacques de Molay admitted that the Templars spat on the cross during initiations, that they worshipped pagan idols, that they practiced sodomy and other abominations. His trembling signature at the document's end was that of a man destroyed, not just in body, but in spirit. But the humiliation did not end there. Philip IV ordered the confession to be read publicly in the town square, before a crowd thirsting for scandal. Jacques de Molay was forced to repeat his admissions, while the people who once revered him as a hero now jeered him as a heretic. For weeks, the process repeated with other Templar leaders. Tortures, extorted confessions, public humiliations. With each confession, Philip's narrative strengthened. The Templars were no longer victims of royal injustice, but confessed criminals who deserved their fate. But not all remained broken. In his heart, Jacques de Molay knew he had committed the greatest betrayal of his life, not against the king, but against God and truth. And in the silence of his cell, while his body's wounds slowly healed, his soul began to forge one last resistance, a resistance that would become legend and curse.
While the Templars' screams echoed through French dungeons, 1,000 kilometers away in Avignon, another drama unfolded in the papal chambers. Clement V, the French Pope whom Philip IV had helped elect, found himself in an impossible position. He was the vicar of Christ on earth, but also a man who owed his political power to the King of France. News of the Templars' arrest reached Avignon like lightning from a clear sky. Clement V had not been consulted about the operation, a direct affront to papal authority, since the Templars answered exclusively to the Holy Father. His first reaction was genuine indignation. "How dare Philip arrest Christ's soldiers without my consent?" he thundered to his cardinals, his normally pale face reddening with anger. "The Templars are my spiritual children, not subjects of the King of France." But papal indignation lasted only until Philip IV's emissaries arrived. Guillaume de Nogaret presented himself before the papal throne with the arrogance of a man who knew he held all the cards. He brought not only the Templars' extorted confessions, but also a subtle reminder of the power his king exercised over the papacy itself. "Holiness," said Nogaret, with a reverence that barely disguised the threat, "His Most Christian Majesty acts only in defense of the faith. The evidence of Templar heresy is irrefutable. Surely your Holiness would not wish to be seen as protector of confessed heretics." The words carried a weight that Clement V knew well. He was not the first pope to discover that spiritual authority meant little when confronted with temporal power. His predecessor, Boniface VIII, had dared challenge Philip IV and died under mysterious circumstances after being humiliated by royal agents. Worse still, Clement V knew his own election had been manipulated by the French crown. Philip IV had ensured that only a friendly pope would be chosen, and now he was collecting the price of that friendship. For days, the Pope agonized in his private prayers. He genuinely believed in the Templars' innocence, but also knew that defying Philip IV could mean not only his own ruin, but a schism in the Church that would tear Christendom apart. The French cardinals, led by Guillaume de Plaisance, constantly pressed for a papal investigation that would validate the royal accusations. "Holiness," they argued, "if the Templars are innocent, a papal investigation will only confirm their purity. If they are guilty, it will be our duty as shepherds to protect Christ's flock from wolves in sheep's clothing." Other cardinals, especially the Italians and Germans, clearly saw the political farce behind the accusations. Cardinal Giacomo Colonna was particularly direct. "Holy Father, this is not divine justice, but royal greed. Philip IV simply wants Templar wealth to finance his wars." For months, Clement V attempted an impossible middle position. Initially, he condemned the Templars' arrest as a violation of papal authority, but then initiated his own impartial investigation. He suspended the French inquisitors, but later reinstated them under political pressure. The final pressure came in the form of a veiled but unmistakable threat. Philip IV convened the Estates General of France in Tours, where he publicly denounced not only the Templars, but any authority that protected them. His words, though not mentioning the Pope directly, were understood by all present. "Any man, no matter how high his office, who protects confessed heretics becomes accomplice to their heresy. Christian France will not tolerate foreign authorities protecting enemies of the faith on French soil." The threat was clear: support our cause or become our enemy. On November 22, 1307, Clement V capitulated. He issued the bull Pastoralis Praeeminente, ordering all Christian kings of Europe to arrest the Templars in their territories and confiscate their goods. The decision was presented as an act of faith protection, but everyone knew it was political capitulation. Jacques de Molay, in his Parisian cell, received the news like a final stab. The Pope, successor to Peter, vicar of Christ, had abandoned the soldiers who had dedicated their lives to defending Christendom. The betrayal was complete. Not only the king, but the Church itself had condemned them. But not all was lost. In countries where Philip IV's power did not reach, kings like Edward II of England and James II of Aragon resisted papal pressures.
protecting the Templars in their territories and openly questioning the validity of the accusations. Clement V realized he had become hostage to his own weakness. He attempted one last desperate maneuver. He convened an ecumenical council in Vienne to definitively decide the Templars' fate. He hoped the assembly of all Christendom could find a solution that would save both the Templars and his own conscience. But Philip IV was not a man who left fate in others' hands. If the Pope did not have the courage to do what was necessary, the King of France would do it himself. The final phase of the Templar tragedy was about to begin.
7 long years had passed since that Friday the 13th that changed the world. 7 years of imprisonment, torture, humiliations, and false hopes. Jacques de Molay, once the most powerful man in Christendom after the Pope and Emperor, was now a shadow bent by age and suffering. But on March 18th, 1314, something extraordinary happened on the small island of Île aux Juifs in the heart of the Seine. The fire that prepared to consume the last Grand Master of the Templars would also ignite a flame of legend that would never be extinguished. The Parisian crowd gathered on the riverbanks, eager for the final spectacle of a tragedy that had captured the imagination of all France. Merchants closed their shops, nobles left their palaces, even children were brought by parents to witness what all believed to be divine justice in action. At the island's center, a pyre of dry wood had been carefully constructed by the royal executioners. The flames would dance high enough to be seen from all Paris, a final reminder of Philip IV's power over anyone who dared defy him. Jacques de Molay was brought in a prisoner's cart, his hands chained, but his posture surprisingly erect for a 70-year-old man who had endured such suffering. Beside him, Geoffrey de Charnay, preceptor of Normandy, maintained equal dignity, his lips moving in silent prayer.
Guillaume de Nogaret personally supervised the execution, his sinister figure standing out against March's gray sky. He had waited years for this moment, the definitive end to the Templar threat to royal power. But something in Jacques de Molay's gaze troubled him, a serenity that seemed out of place at a heretic's condemnation. The papal executor read the sentences aloud, reciting accusations of heresy, sodomy, and blasphemy. His voice echoed over the Seine's waters, carrying words that reduced 200 years of sacred history to a list of invented crimes. When the time came for final words, it was expected that the condemned would beg forgiveness, publicly confess their guilt, or at least show repentance for the crimes they had committed. Instead, Jacques de Molay did something no one expected. He straightened with all the dignity remaining in his broken body, raised his voice with a force that surprised even his executioners, and spoke words that would echo through centuries. God knows the truth. God knows our innocence. We are victims of a cruel conspiracy, destroyed not for our sins, but by a king's greed and a pope's cowardice. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the final confession they expected to hear.
Philip IV of France continued de Molay, his voice gaining supernatural resonance. King who betrayed us after we swore to protect you. Clement V, Pope who abandoned us when we most needed Holy Church's protection. I summon you both before God's tribunal." The following words penetrated the souls of all present like sharp blades. "Philip, Clement, within a year you both shall stand before God to answer for your injustices. The innocent blood you have spilled, King of France, shall be demanded from your dynasty. The curse of the innocent shall pursue your lineage until divine justice is satisfied." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing over the Seine. Then, as if awakening from a trance, the executioners lit the pyre. The flames rose quickly, fed by dry wood and the wind that resumed blowing. But even as fire consumed his body, Jacques de Molay remained erect, his eyes fixed on heaven, his lips moving in a final prayer. Geoffrey de Charnay, beside him, cried out one last declaration. "The order of Knights Templar shall live forever in the memory of the righteous. Our innocence shall be proven by the centuries." The flames engulfed both men, but their voices seemed to echo over Paris long after their bodies became ash. The crowd dispersed in silence, many with tears in their eyes, others crossing themselves compulsively, all carrying in their hearts the certainty they had witnessed something far beyond a common execution. That night, Philip IV dined alone in his chambers, but the food tasted like ash in his mouth. Outside the palace windows, the wind carried the acrid smell of smoke that still rose from the island, mixing with his restless dreams. Jacques de Molay's curse had been pronounced. Now it remained only to wait and see if God would fulfill it. The months following the last Templar's execution were marked by a series of events that seemed to confirm, one by one, the terrible words spoken by Jacques de Molay before the flames. Clement V was the first to feel the curse's weight. The Pope, who had spent years tormented by a guilty conscience, fell gravely ill just 3 weeks after the execution. His physicians could not diagnose the ailment consuming him from within. He spoke deliriously about white knights visiting him in dreams, demanding justice. His servants whispered that on moonless nights they could hear him conversing with invisible voices in his chambers. On April 20th, 1314, exactly 42 days after Jacques de Molay's death, Pope Clement V died in Roquemaure. His last words, according to witnesses, were, "Forgive me, Master Jacques. Forgive my weakness." News of the papal death reached Paris like lightning. Philip IV, upon receiving the message, visibly paled. His courtiers noted how his hands trembled holding the parchment, how his eyes sought shadows that did not exist in the hall's corners. "Coincidence," he murmured to himself, but his voice lacked conviction. The king tried to maintain appearances, participating in hunts, organizing banquets, conducting kingdom business with his usual efficiency. But those close to him perceived the change. Philip IV had become a haunted man, startling at sudden noises, avoiding being alone for long periods. Summer passed in growing tension. The king consulted astrologers, mages, even witches who promised to protect him from the Templar curse. He had masses celebrated for his soul's redemption, distributed alms to the poor, even considered publicly rehabilitating the Templars' memory.
but it was too late. In November 1314, during a hunt in Fontainebleau Forest, Philip IV suffered an apparently minor accident. His horse stumbled, throwing the king, who struck his head on a stone. The royal physicians assured there were no serious injuries, only a light contusion. But the king was never the same again. In the following weeks, Philip IV developed strange and progressive symptoms: unbearable headaches, disturbing visions, episodes of disorientation. He spoke constantly about Templar knights visiting him during the night, collecting the blood debt he had contracted. "I see Jacques de Molay," he confessed to his private confessor, Father Guillaume. "He stands at the foot of my bed, still burning but alive. His eyes are coals that consume me from within." On November 29th, 1314,
at 46 years old, Philip IV of France died under circumstances his physicians could never fully explain. His last words, whispered in a voice hoarse with terror, were directed at something only he could see. "Forgive me, Master Jacques. The debt, I shall pay the debt." Exactly as the last Templar Grand Master had prophesied, within a year of the execution, both the Pope and King, who had destroyed the sacred order, were dead.
But de Molay's curse would not be limited only to the conspiracy's direct authors. Philip IV left 3 male heirs: Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV. All would become kings of France, and all would die without male heirs capable of continuing the direct Capetian dynasty. In less than 15 years, the lineage that had ruled France for more than 300 years would be extinct. Louis X died in 1316, after only 2 years of reign, leaving only a daughter. Philip V reigned until 1322, but also died without male children. Charles IV, the last of the brothers, ruled until 1328 and also died without masculine descendants. The direct Capetian dynasty, which had seemed indestructible, disappeared like smoke in the wind. The French crown passed to a collateral branch, initiating decades of succession wars that would culminate in the terrible 100 Years' War. Contemporaries saw no coincidence in this succession of tragedies. For them, it was tangible proof that Jacques de Molay's curse had become reality. The spilled innocent blood demanded its price, and divine justice manifested through the royal lineage's extinction. Guillaume de Nogaret, the architect of the conspiracy against the Templars, also did not escape the dark fate. He died in 1313, a year before even the final execution, consumed by a mysterious disease that made him slowly waste away. His last months were tormented by nightmares about Templar knights coming for him in the darkness. All of France seemed cursed. Harvests failed, plagues spread, civil wars erupted. The country that had been Europe's most powerful plunged into a period of chaos and suffering that would last generations. With the last conspirators' deaths, an even greater mystery began to capture Europe's imagination. What had happened to the legendary treasure of the Knights Templar? During the night preceding the arrests of October 13, 1307, witnesses reported seeing mysterious caravans leaving Templar commanderies in various parts of France. Covered wagons, escorted by hooded knights, disappeared into darkness, carrying secrets that were never revealed. When Philip IV's soldiers invaded the Temple of Paris, they found empty coffers. The treasures that should have contained the riches of 200 years of accumulation were mysteriously gone. Only some low-value coins and unimportant documents were left behind, as if the Templars knew exactly what was coming. Jacques de Molay took the secret to his grave. Even under the cruelest tortures, he never revealed where the treasure had been hidden or who had been charged with protecting it. His last statement on the matter, made days before his execution, was enigmatic. The true treasure of the Templars was never gold or silver. It was our faith, our loyalty, our honor. These riches are safe, guarded by those who know how to preserve them. In the centuries that followed, treasure hunters, historians, and adventurers scoured Europe searching for the Templars' lost wealth. Castles were excavated, ancient maps deciphered, legends followed to their last traces. Some theories suggest the treasure was taken to Scotland, where Robert the Bruce offered refuge to fleeing Templars. Others point to Portugal, where the order was reconstituted under the name Order of Christ. The most persistent theory, however, points to a Templar fleet that sailed from La Rochelle port on the night of October 12, 1307. 18 Templar galleys mysteriously disappeared, carrying not only material treasures, but also the Order's secret archives, documents that could reveal secrets capable of shaking Christendom's foundations. Some historians speculate these ships reached the Americas 2 centuries before Columbus. The famous Roslin Chapel in Scotland, built by descendants of Templar knights, contains sculptures of plants that exist only in the New World, fueling theories about a secret discovery of lands beyond the ocean. But perhaps the Templars' true legacy is not in the material riches they may have hidden. Perhaps it lies in the very legend they created, in the living proof that even absolute power has limits when confronted with faith and courage. The Order of Knights Templar was officially dissolved in 1312 by papal decree. Its members were scattered, their properties confiscated, their name transformed into a synonym for heresy. But their memory survived, transmitted in whispers, preserved in secret societies, kept alive by those who believed that true justice goes beyond human decisions.
Throughout the centuries, groups of men gathered in secret, claiming to be the true heirs of the Templars. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and dozens of other initiatic societies claimed the Templar inheritance, perpetuating their ideals of brotherhood, esoteric knowledge, and opposition to tyranny. Jacques de Molay's curse became more than a fulfilled prophecy. It became an eternal symbol of the struggle between justice and oppression, between faith and greed, between temporal power and eternal truth. Today, more than 700 years after that fateful Friday the 13th,
tourists visit the small island in the Seine where Jacques de Molay pronounced his final curse. A discreet plaque marks the place where once stood the pyre that consumed the last Grand Master of the Templars. But on full moon nights, local residents still swear they can see a figure in white robes walking along the riverbanks, as if Jacques de Molay still watches over Paris, eternal guardian of secrets that were never revealed, protector of a treasure that may be more valuable than all the gold in the world, the memory of lost honor and the promise that truth, however buried it may be, always finds a way to emerge from the shadows. The secret debt that began everything was paid with blood and betrayal, but the moral debt that Philip IV contracted with history remains unpaid, accumulating interest through the centuries, an account that may never be completely settled. And so, the story of the Knights Templars ends where it began, with a mystery. Not the mystery of their supposed heresy, proven false by time's passage, but the greater mystery of how men dedicated to God could be destroyed by human greed, and how their destruction became the eternal symbol of the struggle between good and evil, between light and darkness, between faith and betrayal. The Templars' treasure is still out there, somewhere. Not in the gold coins or silver bars that Philip IV so coveted, but in the immortal lesson their story teaches, that even the most powerful kings can fall when they defy divine justice, and that truth, like an underground river, always finds a way to reach the surface. Jacques de Molay's curse was completely fulfilled, but his blessing, the preservation of Templar honor's memory, lives on, passing from generation to generation, reminding the world that some treasures are truly eternal.